Olivia told me she likes to masturbate. Now that's not unusual. Around over 45% of women report having masturbated a few times in the past year, and about 22% report masturbating a few times a week. A lot less than men report. What is unusual about Olivia is that she likes to look at herself while she masturbates. She gets a mirror out and she pulls open the folds of her vulva and she watches while she masturbates. Olivia also says that looking at her vulva convinced her that she was a very highly sexual person because her clitoris is comparatively large, like a baby carrot size. And she believes that this made her more masculine and therefore gave her a bigger sex drive, made her more of a sexual person. In actuality, there's no relationship between the size of your clitoris, the shape of your vulva, the color of your vulva, the genital shape or size, and sexual desire or response. The only factor that does play a role is the distance between the clitoris and the urethral opening. So the clitoris and where you pee. And so that actually does predict how orgasmic a woman is during sex. So it was really interesting to me that she thought of how her clitoris looked as predictive of her sexual desire. And I realized what that actually meant is she was trying to justify why she looked the way that she looked, that she wasn't what was standard in her mind. And she started looking at herself in the mirror because she watched porn, and so she was curious about what she looked like. And porn is very much not representative of the normal female body, or the normal male body for that matter. So what she needed to know was that her clitoris was normal. Even though it was maybe bigger than average, it was still totally normal because there's so much variation in female anatomy. The differences don't necessarily mean anything. They're just varieties. They're beautiful, they're healthy, and that's all that matters. And that is really the most important thing that you could learn about sexuality, is that you are normal. There's so much variation and it's all normal. So this is the female reproductive system. Meet the female reproductive system. So we have our external as well as internal female genitalia. So if you look at the chart, you can see this is the bladder. So this is the front of the body, the back. This is the bladder, this is the uterus, and this is the intestinal tract. So if you follow the uterus down, you have the vagina, so that's the tube connecting the outside to the uterus. And then this whole area is the vulva. So the mound at the front is called the mons, it's usually called the mons veneris, whatever, it can be the same thing. But that's just like a triangular mound of fat above the vulva area. And then you have the lips, the labia majora and the labia minora. So the outer lips and the inner lips. Of course, we've talked a little bit about the clitoris. So that is, we're going to talk more about all of this. So I'm just kind of briefly going over some vocabulary. So the clitoris, of course, is that very sensitive structure. Its only function is sexual pleasure. The vestibule is the area of the vulva within the lips, within the labia minora. Vestibule means like an entryway. You might talk about the vestibule in your house. So next time you use that word, you can think of female anatomy. And then you have the urethra and the urethral opening. That's where the bladder is connected to, well, the urethra is the tube connecting the bladder to the urethral opening where you pee. Okay. And the vagina and the urethral opening are two separate holes. Okay, I know some people don't know this, so those are actually two separate holes. You do not pee out of the same hole that you have sex in. Okay, medieval anatomists called women's external genitals the pudendum. And pudendum is a Latin word, comes from the Latin word pudere, which means to make ashamed. So our genitalia were named, quote, from the shamefacedness that is women to have them seen. So the reasoning went like this: women's genitals are tucked away between their legs as if they want to be hidden, as if they are ashamed, whereas male genitals face forward for the entire world to see. They're not ashamed. And why would men and women's genitals be different in this way? If you're a medieval anatomist and you are steeped in this sort of ethics of sexual purity, it's because of shame. Sex is bad, women's sexuality in particular is bad, and therefore that is why women, or God, naturally hid away the women's genitals so that people couldn't see them. Now, if we assume that shame is not actually the reason why women's genitals are tucked under their body, and even if you do believe in, whether you believe that we evolved that way or if you believe that God created us this way, certainly God wouldn't be ashamed of the genitals because he created them. And evolution does not care about where your genitals are located. They just care about how well it functions. So to say shame is the reason is, I hope is obvious that it's not the reason. Okay, so why biologically are male genitals in front and women's genitals are underneath? Well, the answer is they're not. Female genitals are actually right up in front in the same exact location as male genitals. So the female equivalent to the penis is the clitoris, and that is positioned in the same exact location, right up front. It's just less obvious than the penis because it's so much smaller. And it's smaller not because it's shy or ashamed, but just because women don't have to transport our DNA out of the body, right? So we don't need that long extended penis that men have in order to get their DNA or their sperm into a woman's body. That's the only reason why men's penises are designed the way they are. So women don't need that. The female equivalent of the scrotum is the outer labia, so the labia majora and minora, and that's also located in pretty much the same exact place as the scrotum. But because the female gonads, the ovaries, are internal, and you are steeped in this sort of ethics of sexual purity, it's because, and so obviously they are less obvious. And the ovaries are also internal, not because we're ashamed of our ovaries, but because we get pregnant, and so they need to be inside the body. It's the most functional place to put them. So basically female genitals only look hidden because, well, they don't look hidden. Like, if you actually understand the science, they don't look hidden. They only appear hidden if you're looking at them through this cultural lens of female sexuality is bad. And we'll talk about that over and over again in this class, where culture adopts random acts of biology and twists it into something that fits whatever the cultural standard is. In Western civilization, the cultural belief, because of the Romans and Greeks and everything, was sexuality is bad. So therefore everything is explained within that preconceived notion that sex is bad. Okay? If they believed sex was good, then they would have come up with a different theory of why men and women's genitals are different. Okay, so when you can see your body how it is rather than how culture proclaims it to mean, then it's a lot easier to live with your genitals and love your body, including your genitals. And that is a big psychological hang-up that especially women have in our culture, where they think they're gross, they think it's disgusting, and a lot of women haven't even seen their own genitals, which we're going to talk about more later. So yeah, so we're going to look at our genitals through a biological lens instead of a cultural lens, although we've already talked about that some, so we'll talk about it again, I am sure. So what we're going to do now is we'll talk about the ways that male and female genitals are made of exactly the same parts. They're just organized in different ways. Imagine two fertilized eggs have just implanted in the uterus. One is genetically female, the other is genetically male, so fraternal twins, a sister and brother. So, you know, they've got their faces, fingers, feet, cute little toes, and they're developing all the same body part, just organized differently. Okay, so that they have individual bodies. The nose is shaped a little different. The boy's feet are a little longer than the girl's feet, but they're all the same part. They also have the same genitals, and their genitals have all the same basic elements. They're all organized in roughly the same places, but unlike their faces, their fingers, and their feet, those genitals are going to develop in a way so that they are recognizably male or female. Looking at this picture, you can see that it starts out at 7 weeks old, and boy and girl babies are exactly at 7 weeks. And then around 12 weeks, you get a surge of estrogen for girls or testosterone for boys, and then those same parts begin to differentiate, and one becomes you know, what you would expect to be female genitalia, and the other starts to develop into male genitalia. Okay, so that when the baby is born, it is obviously female or obviously male. The genital tubercle, for instance, that develops either into the clitoris or into the penis, depending on if it is exposed to estrogen or testosterone. So it is the same exact part, it just changes kind of size and positioning. It's organized in a different way, although it is the same exact body part. It's washed in masculinizing or feminizing hormones is what we call it. So the male blastocyst responds to this development by getting the penis, testicles, and scrotum. The female blastocyst responds to estrogen and doesn't respond to testosterone at all. It's like resistant to testosterone. And so it develops into the clitoris, the ovaries, and the labia. So very obviously different organization, but again, the same original part. And this is what we call biological homology. So homologs are things that in the male and female of a species has the same biological origins, but may have different functions or be shaped and organized in slightly different ways, but it's still the same body part. That's a biological homolog. Each part of the external genitalia has a homolog in the opposite sex. I've mentioned two of them already. So both male and female genitals have, you know, a round-ended, highly sensitive, multi-chambered organ to which blood flows and it engorges during sexual arousal. In women, that's the clitoris. In men, that's the penis. Men and women have an organ that's soft and stretchy and grows coarse hair after puberty. In women, that's the outer lips, the labia majora, and in men, that's the scrotum. So these are the same exact parts. The parts don't just look superficially alike, they are developed from the same embryonic tissue. So it's literally the same body part, but it just gets morphed into a slightly different variation because of the hormones that the baby is exposed to in utero. All right, so prepare yourself, and because in this picture we're going to look at a lot of straightforward pictures of anatomy. Okay, so I'm just preparing you, like warning you, prepare yourself emotionally. Okay, so here you go. So even if you look closely at the scrotum, you'll see where the scrotum would have split into the labia majora. So the scrotum itself, it has a seam called the scrotal raphe, and that in the little girl would have split and become the lips of the vagina. So guys, you can, next time you look at your scrotum, you can consider if you had been a girl, those would have been your lips. All right, so homology is also why boys and girls both have nipples, or it probably is why, because, you know, it's the same biological, it's the same embryonic tissue, and we all share the same body parts, although men's aren't super useful compared to women's, right? It's the same biological origins, different functions, or in that case, no function at all as far as we're aware. So on the left, you have the clitoris, and this is an aroused clitoris, so this is a fully erect clitoris, and on the right you have a flaccid or non-erect penis. So you can see when the clitoris is at its largest, most engorged, and the penis is at its smallest, they look pretty much the same because they are literally the same body part. Clit, the whole clit, and nothing but the clit, so help me. So the clitoris and the penis are the body parts that are the most densely packed with nerve endings. The visible part of the clitoris, the glans clitoris, is located right up at the top of the genitals, some distance from the vagina. We'll talk about that later when we talk more about orgasm. And it is your grand central station of erotic sensations. It's about 1/8 the size of a penis, and yet it has double the nerve endings, so the clitoris is actually more sensitive sexually than the penis is, which is sort of interesting. And the size can range from like a barely visible little pea to like a fair-sized pickle sort of thing. Some women's clitorises are actually so big that they look like little penises, like they could be 3-4 inches long. And there's even, I don't know, I think it's kind of sad, but you can have like a plastic surgery to have your clitoris reduced in size, which I think also decreases the sensation. So I don't think it's worth it. Just find a guy who likes that sort of thing and you're good to go. Remember, it's all normal. Unlike the penis, the clitoris's only job is sensation. So it's the fun organ. Penis has 4 jobs: sensation, penetration, ejaculation, urination. It does all all that business, okay? So again, two different ways of functioning, one biological origin. So the visible part of the clitoris, the gland, is actually just the head of the clitoris. It's just a tiny part of the whole clitoral organ, which is, again, a homologue to the penis, so it's like the head of the penis, the little acorn-shaped part of the penis, just right at the tip. But just like the penis, there's a whole lot more to the clitoris than just the head of the penis or the glands of the clitoris. The shaft of the penis is, of course, what everyone's familiar with, but even the penis goes into the body, and so there's a large internal section of the penis that you don't see. So the penis is constructed of 3 chambers. We'll talk more about this in the male anatomy chapter. So you have 2 corpora cavernosa, and then you have a corpus spongosum, the spongy body, and which is what the urethra passes through. And all 3 of these chambers go deeply into the body. The clitoris, we think of as just the little nub at the top of the vulva, but it also has the same structure as the penis, so it has the three chambers that blood goes into to cause engorgement, and it also goes deeply into the body. You have the bulbs that extend from the head of the clitoris, and it goes, let me find the picture, where's the picture? Okay. And then you see that it also straddles the vagina. So this is how large the clitoris is. So we only think of it as that little bean at the end, but it's much larger than that. Which is also why pressure on the whole vaginal area, the whole vulva, actually feels good, because that pressure is being put onto the bulbs of the clitoris and the whole clitoral body, really. The clitoris, just like the penis, has internal erectile tissue, so that the 3 columns within the penis, the vagina, the clitoris has the same thing, and it engorges with blood and becomes erect. Okay, again, all the same parts, organized in different ways. The clitoral hood covers the head of the clitoris, and its homologue is the foreskin, which covers the penis. Again, prepare yourself another picture. Okay, so I think we get the idea, right? So homologues, same biological embryonic tissue, but different function, organized in different ways. Point being, again, it's all normal. All right, meet your clitoris. If you've never met your clitoris face to face, or if you haven't seen your clitoris for a while, it's time to have a nice good chat with it and get reacquainted. So pause this video, go get a mirror and look at your clitoris. Or if you're a guy, well, if you are in a partnership with someone, if you're married, whatever, then you should do this with your wife, right? You should take the time to convince her to let you look at her in depth. Like it's a very good experience for you men to have, and for her to actually feel like you appreciate what her genitals look like and that you approve of what her genitals look like would go a long way to giving you a much more confident, sexually healthy and interested wife. A lot of women have these major hang-ups about how they look, and they think they're gross, and especially if they don't match like porn perfect look, then they just think you won't like it. So take a look at it with permission, obviously. Yeah, and if you're a woman, so get a mirror, you just spread your labia, maybe even pull up the flesh of the labia, which will uncover the hood of the clitoris so that you can see it better, and just take a look and appreciate the whole thing, not just your clitoris, your whole vaginal area, right? It might help to lubricate your fingers with spit or lube, or maybe even a little olive oil. So I do have a specific reason for suggesting that you meet your clitoris. So a student came up to me after class one night and said that she'd been talking to her mom throughout the semester, talking about sexuality, and the student mentioned to her mom that there was slides that included actual pictures of women's vulvas and diagrams and illustrations and everything, and the mom was just astonished, and she said something even more astonishing, which is that I don't know where the clitoris is. She's never seen her clitoris. She's 54 years old, had never seen her clitoris. So the student emailed her mom the lectures so that she could also learn, how to explore her own sexual anatomy. So it's really interesting. I mean, the sort of cultural dichotomy we have between male anatomy and female anatomy, male sexuality and female sexuality, Men from day one, like from pre-birth, their penis is right there for them to explore. I mean, there's ultrasounds of boys playing with their penises in their mom's belly. So they experience sexuality immediately and obviously, and it's there every single day. Their penis does whatever it feels like doing, and they have to deal with their sexuality. Women, on the other hand, could go their entire life without ever seeing their genitals. And some women do. And so it's no wonder that women are so much shyer about their sexuality than men are, and they're so much more insecure about it because they don't have the sexual experience. I mean, even just seeing their own genitals, their sexual experience is so limited. Right, so guys, also remember this when you're in a relationship with a woman, how insecure women naturally are about sexuality, because what experience do they have with it compared to what you have? I just think it's really important that every woman looks at themselves, that they take some time, they explore their own body, and that they learn to appreciate it. Also, you should think it's beautiful. All right, so let's talk about your lips, both big and small. So the female inner labia, the labia minora, or the small lips, may not actually be very inner at all. It's totally normal for the labia minora to be larger than the labia majora. So when you watch a porn perfect vulvas are labia majora that come together perfectly, and you have your perfect little camel's toe, and that's it. But that's not, I mean, that's normal, but so normal is also having labia minora, the smaller lips that stick out through the larger lips. And to have really big large lips, or really big small lips, or really big of both, or really tiny of both, I mean, those are all normal. The inner labia may be all one color, it might be different colors, it might have a gradient of colors, it might be more darkening towards the tips of the lips. These are all normal colors, it's all normal, beautiful. Part of it depends on your skin coloring, but part of it is just the natural coloring of the lips. Okay, the male homologue of the inner lips would be the inner foreskin. If a penis has been circumcised, then and the foreskin is surgically removed, then you will often see a change of color midway down. I'll put a picture of that in here for you. And that's because the skin at the top of the shaft is actually the inner foreskin, okay, versus the outer foreskin. They experience sexuality immediately and obviously, and it's there every single day. Their penis does whatever it feels like doing. The outer labia too, like I said, vary differently, from person to person. Some are very hairy, some have hardly any hair at all, some have hair that goes all the way to the anus. Some lips are really puffy and kind of fat, others are flush with the body and barely noticeable. Some are the same color as the rest of the skin, some are much darker, some are lighter. Again, all normal, all beautiful. One thing that I do really suggest is not only you look at your own vulva, but you look at other women's vulvas with their consent. Google search. If you live at home, maybe delete the history when you're done with that. Look at what is actually normal. Just search vulva or search labia majora or labia minora and see what you find on there. Don't look for porn because you've got that porn perfect. It's not reality. There's one certain type of body stereotype that for some reason porn has decided this is it, and they ignore everything else. If all you've ever seen of nudity is porn, then you really have no idea what the female body looks like. So do a Google search, explore what is out there. If you look at these pictures of women's vulvas and you're grossed out by them, or you can't see the beauty in them, or at least see that they're normal, then you really have a lot of emotional growth that you need to do in your life. So speaking to you girls, you may or may not have a hymen even if you haven't had sex. So the hymen is a thin membrane that is along the lower edge of your vaginal opening. Whether you have one or not, I pretty much guarantee that everything you have been taught about hymens is wrong. So let's talk about what's true about hymens. So the closest thing that is true in hymen myths is that Intercourse, if you are a virgin or that if your hymen is intact, can be painful if the hymen isn't stretchy. So the hymen is actually very elastic and it can be stretched, and the more sex you have, the more stretchy and elastic it becomes. And so then you can have sex without pain because it's stretching now. However, I will also say that the most common reason for pain during sex is lack of lubrication. So if you're having pain during sex, get some lube, and most likely that pain will go away. The hymen does not break. It doesn't pop. It sometimes tears. It usually doesn't. It doesn't stay torn forever. It heals itself because it's supposed to be there. It's not some kind of freshness seal. The size of the hymen doesn't vary depending on whether or not the vagina has been penetrated. So you can have had sex for 2 or 3 decades or 6 decades and your hymen can still be intact. You can never have had sex and you cannot have a hymen. You might not have been born with one, or at least not a visible one. You might have damaged it doing something, but most likely you just didn't really have a significant one in the first place. And the sad thing is that over time, so many women have been persecuted for this, right? This is a picture of a hymen right here. Okay, so this little ring right around the edge is the hymen. And again, this stretches, it's elastic, so you can imagine if a penis or a tampon goes through there, it can fit through there without destroying your virginity, okay, without destroying your hymen. It's totally possible. And you can see all these different hymen shapes, right? It's not, like a lot of people would think the imperforate hymen is what women have, and that's not true. Like there's just all sorts of different shapes. And this one right here, the porous one, is practically non-existent. Okay. So you do not usually bleed when you have sex. Usually bleeding during sex is due to vaginal tearing. Especially when it's the first penetration. Oftentimes women are scared, they're nervous, and what does change when a woman begins having sex is the hymen stretches and becomes more elastic, more flexible. Also, as women's hormones change, again, the hymen becomes more flexible. So as you're getting into your 20s, puberty into adolescence, the hymen often atrophies, I guess, with the hymen. Like, what's the right hand gesture? It gets smaller, so it pulls back more towards the wall and becomes less noticeable, if it was even noticeable at all. So the hymen is another example of the wide variability of human genitalia. Okay, it is not the same for every woman. You know, you can have the imperforate hymens, the microperforate hymens, where there's lots of tiny holes, but otherwise like a solid membrane. Imperforate hymens, where it's just a solid membrane. Sometimes those can actually be so inflexible that you have to have surgery and to go in and cut the hymen out. Some women have septate hymens, which are like strands of skin stretched across the mouth of the vagina. Some women's hymens are tough, some are fragile, some disappear when you're a teenager, some are still noticeable even when you're elderly, okay? So women's hymens vary, and hymens, they don't really seem to serve any purpose. Scientists have no idea what purpose hymens serve. It's just sort of like a byproduct, like nipples, I guess. There's really no point of them. It's probably, the biggest theory is that it's a homologue of the seminal colliculus, which is like a crest in the wall of the male urethra. It's probably exactly like male nipples, where it's just simply because men have it, women also have it, because we all come from the same prototype human embryo, and so it just kind of sticks around because it's a homologue. It's a perfect example of the way humans have to put meaning on everything, even when it's not there. So, we don't have any cultural meaning to men's nipples, and yet we have cultural meaning to the hymen. It's there, it has to serve a purpose, and it has to fit into our cultural values, so therefore it is a reflection of women's sexual purity, which is the ideal. Such a weird idea could only be invented in a society that has hang-ups about sex, right? Also, during the witch hunts, like the Salem witch trial and everything, they believed that the clitoris was a third nipple that was evidence that a woman was a witch. So if they had a clitoris, they were a witch. In some societies, this, cult of sexual purity for, you know, women's sexual purity is so bad that, I mean, historically women have, and currently today too, women are beaten for this, they're killed for this. You know, you don't have a hymen anymore, you deserve to be raped. Or they're told, like, if their hymen is still intact, they're told they couldn't have been raped because otherwise their virginity would be gone, and that's not true. You can have sex 1,000,000 times and still have an intact hymen. Some women, their hymen has been torn through, you know, like horse riding is the big one doctors always talk about, and then they're told that they had sex because the hymen is no longer totally intact. There's places around the world where, you know, they used to have like the chastity belt. Some places, especially I think in Africa, they will take the labia majora, the outer lips, and they'll sew them together so that there's no room for the penis. They just leave a little hole at the bottom so that when the girl pees or menstruates, the fluid can come out, and they don't always leave a big enough hole, and then it backs up into her body and she dies of, you know, massive septic infection. And then on the wedding night, lucky her, she gets to be cut open before they have sex. Wonderful cultural tradition there. Yeah. Some cultures hold this sexual purity ideal up so high that they do clitorectomies, where they cut the clitoris off so that the woman can never have any sexual pleasure, or much less sexual pleasure. And the idea is if she can't enjoy sex, she won't want to have sex, and so then she will be pure for marriage. I don't know why that would make marriage good, but yeah. All right, and I'm going to post a video on the clitorectomy sort of cultural thing so that you guys can learn more about that too. Side note here, I keep saying vulva, I keep saying vagina, I use it interchangeably. Everybody uses it interchangeably, and they do not mean the same thing. The vulva is actually the whole outer external female genitalia. That's the vulva. So the clitoris, the lips, all of that, the hair, everything, that's the vulva. The vagina is simply the tube inside where the penis has its fun. The whole thing is the vulva, but who really cares? But just so that you know it and you don't feel ignorant, why is there a fly again? I swear the only time I see a fly in this house is when I'm making videos. I'm going to get rid of that fly once and for all. Let's talk about the sticky bits of the vagina, the vulva, vagina. The whole thing is the vulva, but who really cares? But just so that you know it and you don't feel ignorant, why is there a fly again? I swear the only time I see a fly in this house is when I'm making videos. That's crazy. All right, let's talk about the sticky bits of the vagina, the vulva. Let me get to my notes. It helps the sperm to move through the vagina a little bit faster. So there are a lot of benefits to lubrication. Sex is a lot funner with proper lubrication. When women get wet, this is what's happening. Okay, so that term, she's wet or I'm wet or whatever, that's the Bartholin's gland releasing fluid during sexual arousal. But one thing to consider is that both men and women kind of get wet. The male homologue to the Bartholin's gland is the Cowper's glands, which sits just below the prostate and produces the pre-ejaculate. So during sexual arousal, men and women both get wet and produce fluids. Why we talk about men getting hard and women getting wet when, you know, from a biological perspective, both men and women get hard and get wet during sex. So the clitoris gets aroused and gets an erection, just like the penis gets an erection, because it's the same body part, right? It's the homologue to each other. So the clitoris gets blood flow into it, it gets bigger, it gets an erection, it gets hard, and the penis does the same exact thing with the same exact anatomy. Those 3 columns inside fill up with blood and it gets bigger and aroused. And then both female and male genitalia produces fluids. Yeah. Okay, so wetness is considered an indication that a woman is ready for sex, that she is sexually aroused. We're going to talk more about that in the desire chapter, but that's not necessarily true. Since intercourse is kind of assumed to be like the center of the sexual universe, we've sort of metaphorize male hardness and female wetness as the ultimate indicator of sexual arousal. If he's hard, he wants to have sex. If she's wet, she wants to have sex. But like our anatomies, our physiologies are all made of the same components. You know, changes in blood flow, produces of genital secretion, they're all organized in different ways. We put that spotlight on male hardness and female wetness, but male wetness is happening too, and female hardness is happening too. Women also have a set of glands at the mouth of the urethra, the orifice that we pee out of it. It's called the Skene's gland, and they are the homologue of the male prostate. So the prostate has two jobs. It swells around the urethra so that it's impossible for a man to pee when he's sexually aroused. So if you've ever had a hard time peeing, that's why. And it produces about half of the seminal fluid used during ejaculation, the seminal fluid in which the sperm travels. In other words, the ejaculate. So in women, the Skene's gland also swells around the urethra. So when you're sexually aroused, you have a hard time peeing. So if you've ever, had an orgasm and then you went to pee, which by the way is good practice for after having sex, because the penis can often bring bacteria into the vagina and then you get an infection. So try to pee after having sex. But if you've ever tried to go pee and then you had to kind of like take a deep breath and relax so that you could actually pee, that's because the Skene's gland is swollen and it's pinching off your urethra and you can't get the pee to come through, okay? So that's happening in men and women because they are homologues to each other. In some women, the Skene's gland produces fluid, and this is what female ejaculation is, or squirting, right? Which is sort of like this thing that's become so big in porn right now. It's like the ultimate, if you can make a woman squirt. I get asked about it pretty regularly, and one day I've been asked, like, how do I squirt? And 5 minutes later I get a message saying, I squirt, how do I stop squirting? Because it's embarrassing. So there's just like, there's so much, like, they're both normal. Whether you do or you don't is normal. Some women do, some women don't. It's more unusual if you do. So if you feel like you should be doing it, or guys, if you think she should be doing it, it's fairly unusual. If she does do it, it's just because it's normal for her body, okay? Her Skene's gland just produces more fluid. So needless to say, our culture sends a lot of mixed messages to women about their genitals, their genital fluids, or lack thereof. And it just causes all sorts of problems in sex. One woman I know never ejaculated until after menopause, and she got a new partner, and all of a sudden she's ejaculating like a quarter cup of fluid with every orgasm. So was it the hormonal changes? Was it the new partner? Was it something else? No idea. But this brings me to an important point about genitals. Sometimes they're wet, sometimes they have a fragrance, sometimes they're not wet. These are all normal parts of our sticky, wet sexuality. Your genital secretions are probably different at different times of the month, as your menstrual cycle changes, your diet changes, stress levels change. These are all going to affect how your genitals act, behave, and secrete. If you don't find the smell and the wetness of your genitals to be completely beautiful and entrancing, then that's not a surprise considering what our culture teaches about female genitals. But how you feel about your genitals and their secretions is learned. It's not just our natural human mind to feel negative about ourselves. And loving your body just as it is will give you bigger arousals, bigger orgasms, better desire, and a better sex life, which we are going to talk about more in a later chapter, but okay, that's my soapbox for the day. All right, on a side note, we've talked a lot about these genital homologues, where a body part for a man and a woman are the same original body part when we're undifferentiated blastocysts, and then as we grow, they kind of differentiate into what we call male or female body parts. But again, remember that these are the same body parts. So we do have some people, which is rare, where they have intersex parts and hermaphrodites and so on. So their genitals are not obviously male or female at birth, and there's happen to be organized somewhere between, standard female and standard masculine. The size of the penis, the location of the urethral opening, the split of the labiosacral tissue, like the scrotal raphe where it separates into the lips, these can all be somewhere in between male or female. Now that does not mean that they are not male or female. It simply means that their blastocystic tissue did not differentiate into perfect standard male genitals or perfect standard female genitals. Perhaps the clitoris started developing partially into a penis, so they have a particularly large penis, or maybe the scrotum began to split a little bit, so you don't have the standard scrotum. It looks a little bit like lips, or things like that. So there can be a lot of differences in how the genitals look that can really be explained by homology, by the homologs. Yeah, so basically they had a difference in like the biochemistry of their body as they developed as embryos, and these, even though they're small changes, they resulted in also small changes in the genitals so that they don't look standard. There's nothing wrong with their genitals, there's nothing wrong with anybody's genitals, but they don't look standard. They're just organized in a different way. For example, the male urethral opening might be on the underside of the penis rather than right on the tip of the penis. That happens somewhere along the shaft of the penis. But there's no problem with that as long as it doesn't interrupt, the flow of urine. As long as you can still go pee, what does it matter where it is? As long as they're not causing pain, infection, and other problems, then again, it's just, different parts, same parts organized in different ways. Why might this seemingly simple fact that all human genitals are made of the same parts but organized in different ways be one of the most important things you can learn in human sexuality, according to me? 2 reasons. 1, because it means your genitals are normal, not just normal, but amazing and beautiful, right? You should appreciate your genitals even if they are not porn perfect, right? That's not a realistic standard of humanity, right? The entire range of genitalia is normal. The entire range is beautiful and fascinating and should be appreciated. And this is not just genitalia, but all of sexuality, our sexual response, what we're interested in sexually, like whether you like to be spanked or you just like vanilla sex or whatever. These are all normal. The way we desire things, the way we orgasm, the way we do everything about sex, our psychology of sex is all normal, and there's a big, beautiful, wide range of it that you should appreciate. Who cares if somebody else likes it or not? If you find, if you're dating someone that doesn't like your body, then screw him or her, not literally like in the psychological sense. Get rid of them and find somebody who does like your body. It doesn't, if they don't like you, or if they don't like your sexual response, if you're too aggressive as a woman, then find somebody who likes that, because there's a lot of guys who would like a woman who initiates and who is really into sex. So, this is why you date, right? To find somebody who likes you who you are. Variety may be the one and only true characteristic of human sexuality, that there's a huge amount of variety, and that's the only truth about sexuality, that from our bodies to our desires to our behaviors, there's as many sexualities as there are people on the planet. So we started this chapter by talking about the way our culture metaphorizes anatomy, creating, meaning from random acts of biology, saying, why women's genitalia are located the way they are. To help undo all that, I like to kind of use another metaphor. And again, I've talked about how in this class, I think it's more than just shoving information into your brain. Like, I want to give you something useful to change your perspective on life and to help improve yourself. So I like to think of sexuality as more of like a garden. You're born, on the day you're born, you're given this plot of soil. And the soil, the richness and the fertility of it is different than the garden plots that are given to other kids when they're born. And right away, your family and your culture begins to plant things in that soil. They're tending the garden for you until you're old enough to take care of it yourself. And they're taking care of it the way that they think is best, what needs to be planted. They're trying to create the garden that they think will work best for you as you grow up. They plant language and attitudes and values into it, and knowledge about your body and about love and about how to do life. These are all the things that are planted in that garden. And they teach you how to tend that garden, because as you grow up from adolescence into adulthood, it's then going to be your responsibility to take care of that garden. But you didn't choose any of that. You didn't choose the plot of land that you got. You didn't choose, you didn't get to choose one that was, the most fertile and perfect garden plot that you could ever have. You just got what you were given, and you didn't choose what was planted in there, and you didn't choose how it was tended, whether it was an organic garden or they sprayed pesticides in it. You didn't get to choose any of that. And your garden was tended to for years before you were able to take any responsibility. So as you reach adolescence, you begin to take responsibility of that garden that was bequeathed to you. And you might find that your family and friends and culture planted some wonderful, beautiful things in there and took such a good job of your garden, and they made it easy for you to take care of it. Or you may find that there's some things you want to change, or you might even find that it's just a mess, that there's weeds growing in it and they planted it in a disorganized way, and they planted bad things instead of good, or they planted things that you would never want in your garden. You know, maybe the things they planted weren't even bad, but they just don't thrive in the climate that the garden is in, you know. So, and maybe there's things that would fit better for you. So there's all this range of, you know, maybe you got lucky with what was planted, or maybe, you know, what got planted was really bad and you got stuck with some toxic crap in your garden. And you're left with the task of uprooting all the junk plants from your garden and pulling all the weeds and just getting the garden back into shape. And some people were lucky, and some people, you know, have to replace what's in their garden with things that are healthier for themselves. And your physical body, including your genitalia, are they're one of the plants that are put into your garden. You know, there's values and ideas and attitudes that were planted that you now have to deal with because somebody else planted them for you. So you have to decide, is that something that you still want to have in your garden, or is it something that you want to change, that you want to pull out of your garden? And you know, some things like Bermuda grass, once you get it in your garden, it's hard. Like, it keeps growing back, and you just have to keep pulling it and pulling it and pulling it until it's eventually gone. So you can't give up. You have to keep working, and eventually you will get it out of your garden. So anyhow, I hope that wasn't too corny. I hope that helps, and I hope you enjoyed learning about female anatomy, and I hope you weren't too uncomfortable with the pictures. So if you have any messages or any questions, just message me, and we'll talk about male anatomy next. All right, bye.